ways to improve teaching and to ensure that it is effective. And finally, I get to evaluation, because evaluation is actually a tiny aspect of the whole puzzle for producing effective teaching. We're in a policy context where focusing on teacher effectiveness through evaluation is seen as an important path for education policy. And surely, I've been saying for 20 years, we need new approaches to teacher evaluation. Nobody would doubt that, and I did a study at the Rand Corporation when I was there in 1980-something about teacher evaluation models, and we found it was a pretty, it was a wasteland out there for the most part, and we did document the first peer assistance and review model in Toledo, Ohio, as one of the shining lights on the landscape. But there still is a long way to go in getting good evaluation. We now have value-added models that are promoted as tools to accomplish this goal, and the question is, what should we do in this domain to really help teachers improve and to make good, timely, expedient personnel decisions? There are researcher concerns about value-added modeling. It seems like an obvious thing to do, and in fact, I was once a proponent of value-added modeling. I've done a lot of research that uses VAN methods myself in large-scale studies. What we found is that teachers who looked highly effective in one year might look totally ineffective in the next year. And we put a teacher in one basket and say, oh, look at this, there's a great performance in this class. Then we look at another class and it would be completely different. And this has been coming out in studies for quite a while. But we said, well, why is it so unstable? This is bouncing around like crazy. We've got to see what's going on here. And we found what many other studies have since found, which is that despite all of those statistical controls, the composition of the teacher's class, who the students were, had a bigger effect on the value-added rating than who the teacher was, him or herself. And so we found also that teachers' value-added effectiveness ratings vary depending on the measure of achievement use. If you look at how a teacher appears to be effective on a basic skills test, a typical standardized test that states are currently using, and then you look at the effectiveness rating of teachers on a different test that's more open-ended, that requires more writing, more problem-solving, more conceptual understanding, there is only about 25% overlap in the ratings of the teachers on these two different measures. It varies also by the various conditions of the classroom. Instructional supports, time, and so on can also vary depending on whether tutoring and instructional specialists are present, and of course, as I've said, student characteristics and attendance. So, in fact, student attendance can have as much effect on a student's achievement gains as a teacher. So there are all of these things that are in there. When you look at the value-added rating that is produced, it is what one of my colleagues, who's a statistician, said is the error term in the regression equation. It's what's left over that you can't explain based on the few things that you're able to control for, which is usually things like student demographic variables and grade level and a few things like that. But in that metric is whatever the contribution of that teacher is, whatever the contribution may be of other teachers who are teaching similar skills or have done so in prior years. So if I'm a history teacher and I'm assigning, research papers and having kids write a lot, and the English teacher is doing no writing at all, if the kids improve in writing, it will get attributed to the English teacher, even though it may have come from the history teacher. I mean, there's those kinds of things. There's also all of the characteristics of the student and their home situation and their teaching situation. There is the leadership of the school, the curriculum that you're asked to. All of that is in this measure that's called the teacher effectiveness measure, of which the individual teacher is only a component. And that's why there is this instability in the scores. Tim Sass did a study looking across 5 urban districts at how teachers' scores changed from year to year. And if you think about grades A, B, C, D, F, as though we took each quintile, a teacher who got an A across these 5 districts, teachers who got an A in the first year, in the top quintile, were most likely to get a B, C, D, or F in the second year. 70% of them changed their grade, and about half of them got below the average. Those who had an F in one year were most likely to get a different grade in the subsequent years, and about half of them would be above the average. So there's that much movement. In our study that we used to look at what was causing the movement, we found teachers like this one, who in year 1 was in the bottom decile of value-added rankings, and we put her in the ineffective pile. Then we found that in the next year she was in the 10th decile, which is the top 10% of teachers. So we put her in the effective pile. We said, what's going on here? This is a teacher in the same high school, teaching the same course, not a beginning teacher. The model control for prior achievement, demographics, and school fixed effects, which gives you an extra control. But what was going on was that in the first year, 60% of her students were English learners. In the second year, less than 5% were English learners. In the first year, most of them were low income and Latino. In the second year, the demographics had changed. And in the second year, she had had parents with higher levels of education. This kind of finding about the effects of having English learners has shown up in the recent situation in New York. Many of you may know that the New York Times also published teachers' value-added scores. And all kinds of anomalies were discovered, including errors in the database, etc., but also the fact that teachers who were highly rated in one class were low rated in another class. The teacher who was dubbed the worst teacher in the city turned out to be a highly respected, much admired teacher of new immigrant students in a local elementary school. Kids taking tests in English before they spoke English. The other thing they found there is that teachers teaching gifted and talented classes, the kids had maxed out on the tests, so they couldn't show growth. So none of those teachers could be found to be effective. Very few of the teachers teaching new English learners could be found to be effective. Not very many special education teachers could be found to be effective. They made a decision they were not going to initially tenure teachers based on that measure. So whole groups of teachers were unable to be tenured based on those very squirrely measures that changed so much from year to year. In New York, a third of the principals in the state have signed a letter to the Board of Regents protesting the teacher evaluation system and suggesting that they will not want to use it because it will, in fact, inaccurately identify teachers. That we need an evaluation system that takes student learning into account in appropriate ways, that allow accurate decision making, and support teachers in learning how to improve their craft on a continual basis. And we're going to have to look beyond, I think, the early promises of value-added measures to find that accurate, fair, and educative system. So what do we know from other research about how to build an evaluation system that would support effective teaching? First of all, I think you want to incentivize those things that cause individuals and groups of teachers and schools as a whole to become more effective. And that means that you need an integrated system that looks at teaching practice in relation to teaching standards, curriculum goals, and student needs. I'm going to come back to that point. There should be a way to include contributions to colleagues in the school, so we build a collaborative culture. We found that standards-based evaluations, which use structured observations of teaching based on professional standards, along with other evidence of work like lesson plans and student work, not only offer stable evidence over time, but they are related to student learning gains. When teachers get regular feedback on professional standards, they improve their practice, and they become more effective as a result of that. The Danielson framework that many of you probably know, because I think it's been used in LA, is one such measure. There are other tools available. This is based on the California Standards for the Teaching Profession in a district near me in the Bay Area. And it provides indicators of how teachers are practicing and can provide a basis for strong feedback. We need to use multiple data sources to reflect practice and learning. Observations, in person or video, including some by experts trained in the content area as well as in evaluation. At tenure, where the decision for the evaluation decision has to be rigorous and meaningful, we ought to have some way to include content experts in the judgment about teaching practice, even if we can't do it every year in the standard evaluation cycle. But all evaluators should be trained in evaluation strategies and in how to look at instruction. We should look at evidence of practices that support student learning. It's not just what you stand up and do in the classroom. It's also the way in which you grab those kids after school and say, come and work on this, the way you call home and say, you know, to someone's parent, please be sure that they're studying for this test or that you have these materials that also contribute to student learning. And then we need evidence of student learning that's measured in a variety of ways. There are many districts. Long Beach, right up the road, is one of them, very successfully using student work samples, a variety of pre and post measures, fall to spring assessments that are either classroom-based, school-based, or district-based to measure student learning and to look at how kids are learning, exhibitions of mastery like science projects or other exhibitions that kids might do as well as tests, and compile those in a way that allows you to look at practice, evidence of student learning in a structured fashion, and teachers' contributions to come up with a unified judgment. Value-added measures might play a role among those many measures if one looks at them in full understanding of the limitations that may attach to them. But I should note that of all the tests that one might use as measures of student learning, state tests are perhaps the least appropriate. What we've been finding, and it's reflected in this quote from the National Research Council's Board on Testing and Assessment, is that BAM estimates of teacher effectiveness should not be used to make operational decisions because the estimates are far too unstable to be considered fair or reliable. And the reason for that is severalfold. Number one, under No Child Left Behind, states were told that they had to measure grade level standards in their tests. So state tests today measure very little below the grade level and very little above the grade level. So if you're a 9th grade teacher, like many I work with, who have kids in your English class who are reading at grades 1 through 8, or maybe 1 through 12, you might move some of those kids from, say, the 2nd grade level to the 5th grade level, but it won't show up on the test that's measuring the 9th grade standards. So the gains are not picked up. The second reason the state tests are problematic is that they are spring to spring, and we know that summer learning loss will already have advantaged the teachers of wealthy kids and disadvantaged the teachers of poor kids before they even get back to school. And the third reason that our state tests are problematic is that they are very narrow measures of almost exclusively multiple choice items that will drive a curriculum that is not focused on whether kids can do what the Common Core standards ask for, which is to read deeply and to write extensively, to engage in multi-step problem solving and critical thinking in mathematics, to apply their literacy knowledge in other content fields. We need to be thinking about all of these things when we build an assessment system that we hold teachers accountable for, because that's going to drive the instruction our children receive. Tests are not a black box. It matters what we teach. It matters what students are asked to learn and how they're asked to demonstrate their learning. And we need rich, authentic kinds of learning and evidences of learning, along with the ways in which we look at teachers' practice in the classroom.